Hi there everyone. We are having another live lesson today, so thank you for joining in. We are doing our final still life drawing today, so that's task 5. So we've done 5 tasks now. Building on our skills of observational drawing and trying out different methods to improve composition, ideas about how to use graphite, how to use charcoal. So this is our final still life, okay? All the techniques will still count with future lessons, but it's always good to start off with learning how to draw from an observation point of view. So I've got my objects in front of me. We're doing cutlery. So the difficulty of cutlery and why we've left this until now is all about the material. So you might have done some objects that do have reflections, or you might have drawn a glass maybe in one of your past attempts at still life. But we're going to concentrate purely on drawing a metal object. So that's why we've got cutlery in front of us. Now, as you can see, when I started off, what's quite difficult about cutlery sometimes is proportions, especially if you're doing the whole cutlery set. You've got a knife, fork and a spoon. So what I did is, using a mark making technique, which we did last week, I just sketched out quickly each of the cutlery so I can see the sizes in comparison to each other, so their proportions next to each other. So in doing that, it doesn't now matter what your composition is, whether you mix them up or have them next to each other. It's entirely up to you how you lay out your cutlery for this one. But you might want to really challenge yourself, because this is the last observation drawing. Your observation should be really coming on by now, so you can really challenge yourself. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to get a nice composition together for your cutlery. But as I say, just sketching it out very quickly just to get proportions, you can then see when you've got really awkward angles going on how they relate to each other. So that's what I did. I just sketched them out first. So doing a metal object is all about reflections, really, isn't it? And the light and the shadows. So it's all about tone. So you'll see a whole resource on the blog that goes, you'll see it on the group page, a link to the blog, which has a resource on different techniques and some examples of compositions and things. So you might find that useful too. But I'll talk through how you go about getting some realism in an object that's actually quite tricky. But again, it's all about observation and drawing what you see. And as you can see with cutlery, it is all about tone, isn't it? I mean, you can see with me holding this up here, you've got a very definitive highlight going on here and then a very dark shadow. But unlike some of the other observations that we've been doing, they're sometimes blended, but not with metal. You can see there's very sharp, clean lines when a highlight finishes and a shadow begins. So that's what you're really looking for, and that's what's going to give you the effect. So with this drawing here, I've been using both charcoal pencil. I've got a charcoal stick too for the really darker areas, and I've also got some pencils, so some graphite too. So I'm just building up. It's a bit of a mixed media piece here, but just because you want really extreme tones in this drawing, so you want some really dark shadows and you want some really bright highlights. So today we're on white paper, so you can see some of the paper is completely untouched, because as you can see when you look at cutlery, this bright section that does appear wherever your cutlery is lying, hopefully you've got some bright natural light to really get those shadows intensified. So with the white paper, you obviously keep the highlights completely white. We've said before that you could use coloured papers, and then you could use white chalk to actually show the highlights. Sometimes that is easier, so you've got both and your paper starts off as the mid-tone. But if you start on white, then you've got to think, well, that is my brightest highlight, so we've got to see where those are. I'll also show you as well, I can see when I had my spoon in front of me, let me put it back where it was, here, that this is a bright highlight here, because my light's coming from the back here into the room. So this is a bright highlight. Now, obviously you'll draw the line in to define the end of your shape, but to make it more realistic, the reason that is so bright is because behind it, my background is darker. So always colour in colour, shade, you know what I mean, shade behind where there's a highlight. Okay, don't try and eliminate outlines, because then that will make your object more realistic as well. So you want to set up a composition, especially with each of these, to really accentuate those shadows and highlights. So I would take photos, okay, to test it out. And if you've got a photo in front of you, then you can copy from that photo, and because the photo's two-dimensional and you're translating, your drawing is two-dimensional, then it's almost slightly easier in that sense. So always draw from the objects in front of you so you really get to see them. But if you have a photo, if we go back to task 1, which was drawing with the right side of the brain, so looking at things upside down, then that's perfect. For the photo, you can turn it on its side, you can turn it upside down, and you'll get to see the shadows that you might not have noticed with just the objects in front of you. And also what's amazing, obviously, with your cameras is you can make that image very monochrome, can't you? You can turn it to a black and white image, you can intensify those shadows and make them extreme, so that you've got a manipulated photo with those extremities on them. Makes it easier to copy. So I would get your camera phone or get a any sort of camera and take some images and play around with it. So for this one we could do different angles, so you could have your eye line to play with perspective and things. You could have it very different, so you could look at an object like from this angle, and then you get the perspective of it going far away from you. You can mix it up, obviously, and have forks upside down. It don't have to be the right way. You can be quite creative with this, okay? And then you can even zoom in on the page. You don't even need to do the whole cutlery. You can zoom in. And if you look at the blog, there's some great examples of how students have zoomed in and done some really interesting compositions with their cutlery. So I would take photos, overlap them. You can always drop them and make it very random, interwove them. You can add more cutlery. Maybe you just like forks, maybe or just spoons. So you can just do those. The idea of this task really is to test your knowledge of shadow and using tone in your drawing, and can you get that extreme, and can you be bold enough to literally let your line completely finish like this one, this curve here, before it goes on to the next one, or like this here. Real depth of your work by having those really bold lines and seeing if you can capture where that extremity is and where that harsh line is. So yeah, so play around with composition, use some different coloured paper if you like, have some really good light, play around with that. You can manipulate the light, you can make them darker. If you have them in one area, maybe you like the light on this part of the foot, but then you can change it and think, no, I want the light here. When I was looking at my foot, when I was doing this sketch here, because the light is coming from behind, this part of the foot was completely black, because obviously it's lifting up off the page. Another thing to think about, which makes your drawing more interesting, is the casting shadow. So as you can see on my spoon here, I've got this casting shadow, and because that is bending in the opposite direction, obviously because of its reflection, that's giving my drawing more depth as well. It's lifting this bit higher off the page because you can see the shadow underneath it. So having a really good look at where your casting shadow is and play with the light. Maybe we turn this way and have the shadows more extreme in that direction. It's about playing. It's about being experimental and getting a bit creative with your composition first, and taking those photos will give you a really good idea, because then you can flick through them and see which one you like best. So that's it for cutlery really. It's all about harsh lines, really good range of tone. It's up to you whether you use charcoal or graphite. Maybe you want to do a mixture of the two, because then the graphite is really good for mid-tones and that charcoal will really bring out those shadows. But it's up to you. So this task is a still life with cutlery, okay, trying to get the texture and the shine in metal. And if you can do that, it just shows how far your observation drawing is going, because you really have to see the light in this one. So that is cutlery. Okay, so feel free to upload. It'd be great if you upload your work to the group, and then people can comment on there. We can see how you're doing, and I can give you any other advice. Maybe something's missing. It doesn't matter if you haven't done observation drawing before and you've missed the other test. Just join in, have a go, see what your observation skills are like, and we'll go on to something completely different next week. I'll talk about portrait this time. So this group is all about learning how to draw and paint right from scratch. So we've done observation. Hopefully those skills are building up and you've learnt a lot about how to see objects and how to see and use tone and how to use charcoal and graphite. So that's been our focus for now. The blog's there for you to read through and grab all those resources so that you get to learn all of these skills that you've always wanted to know. Do let me know if there's anything else you want me to cover, or if you need to ask any questions. And thanks for tuning in. Have a go at cutlery. Good luck with it and enjoy it.